This is Arthur Bush. Welcome to Radio Free Flint. We have Phil Hagerman, who is a entrepreneur, a philanthropist. Your personal story dates back to working in a pharmacy with your father, right?
That's right, Art. Yeah, I got out of college in 1975. I'm kind of an old guy, but still enjoying life and still working. But my dad called me 2 weeks before I graduated from college and said, "Son, I sold my company." He was a partner in a small chain of 4 drugstores. And his next comment, he said, "But I just bought it back." I said, "Dad, I have no idea what you're talking about." And he said, "Well, I swapped my share of the 4 drugstores for the one new store that you and I are going to come run. So get your butt out of school and come help."
And where was that store at?
It was on Beecher Road. Excuse me, that was on Flushing Road originally. Our original location was on Flushing Road. And they built the store in 1973. It wasn't doing very well. 75 was a really serious economic downturn. And his partner really wanted to close the store. Dad felt like he had a kid graduating from college and him and his son ought to just take it over. And so that's what we did.
And you went to college in Michigan?
I did. I went to Ferris, which was a very well-known small school, but a very well-known pharmacy school.
And you raised your family in Fenton, or?
I did, absolutely, in the Fenton area. I've lived in the Fenton area most of my life, and again, just commuted back and forth, the 15 to 20 miles or minutes to Flint.
Did you grow up in the city at all, or did you ever live in the city?
No, we were kind of lake people, Art. When I was really little, my dad's original location was in Davison. I lived in Davison, and our dad's original drugstore was Davison Road Pharmacy. And then Fenton Drug was actually original. Davison Road was the first one my dad ran. But we moved to Fenton when I was really young. And I grew up in Fenton, Lake Fenton schools, kind of a country boy a little bit, living on the lakes out in the Fenton area.
You've been described by some people called you the trifecta man. You're somebody who not just has donated as money, but also gives time and talent and your treasure to the city and seeing it redeveloped. And how did that come about?
Well, it's interesting, Art, and I appreciate those nice comments. I do think sometimes it takes more than money. It does take kind of an intensity and activity and things, and really all that came about as my business was in Flint Township for most of the career. Again, you said on Flushing Road, and then we moved it to Beecher Road, and so I was engaged with the city of Flint, but not actively involved in downtown. Kind of living in Fenton and, going back and forth to work. But as we started to grow the company and I started to buy and move my business into larger locations, we moved into a large location on Corona Road where there were 4 buildings. We bought a couple of buildings. And then very quickly, we realized we were going to outgrow that. And in 2009, the Great Lakes Tech Center, went up for auction and we got involved and we acquired a major chunk of it, about half of it. And in the end of 2010, we had renovated it and we moved 295 people in there. And from there, Art, I think my love for Flint and my involvement, those, time, talent, treasure probably accelerated a lot. You think about 2010, right? You couldn't have asked for a worse economic downturn. The entire country, the automotive industry had turned down in the late 90s, early 2000s. So Flint was getting decimated by that. Then in 2008, you had the financial crisis on top of that. General Motors and everybody got beat up even worse. And so it was a really, really hard time for the city. All of a sudden, we had a company that was growing like a rocket ship. We moved 295 people into the building in 2010, and I committed to the governor to get some tax breaks that we met, that we could hire 1,000 people in 5 years. And so, in Flint in 2010, when everything was really going downhill, that was news that had been unheard in a long time. And we had accomplished that. We actually did that and met all our goals. And so I think the city embraced what we were doing so powerfully, Art. It almost scared me. I'm like, well, we're just one company and we're just one group, but they embraced us with such open arms that we really started to give back. And we created a win-win, Art, right? We created an opportunity for Diplomat to thrive in a city that was looking for a chance. We had this opportunity to hire 1,000 displaced automotive workers and move them into healthcare and retrain them. The city really gave back to us and embraced us at every level, the city and the state both. And it was just a really exciting ride.
Now, your pharmacy's been described as one of the largest specialty pharmacies in the country. I'm not sure I understand that business model. Could you explain it a little bit?
Yeah, I can do the real short version of that, Art. Specialty pharmacy really started in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And what happened is more and more complex drugs. Everybody understands the model of going to a Walgreens or going to a CVS or going to a corner drugstore. but more and more drugs started to come to market that were incredibly expensive and oftentimes very toxic. And then rules came out that made pharmacy in general more complicated. The Medicare Part D program, the donut hole where people's drugs were covered and then they weren't covered, and then certain parts of them were covered. And pharmacy as an industry got complicated, and the drugs themselves coming out got incredibly expensive. And what that required, it required pharmacies to start acting differently. And a group of pharmacies started adding services and capabilities that were different than the standard Walgreens or the standard corner drugstore. We started to being able to sell drugs that the other drugstores didn't have. At one point, 70% of Diplomat's sales were coming from drugs that only 20 or 30 pharmacies in the United States had access to. Specialty pharmacy became the management of complex illnesses and patients with serious health problems and managing expensive and highly toxic drugs. And Diplomat moved quickly from the year 2002 or three aggressively into that. And that's what grew our sales so astronomically. And we grew our 25 million in sales. We were a $10 million sales pharmacy in 2000. In 2005, we'd grown to 25 million in sales. But then that's when all the changes came, and we went from 25 million to 35 million to 65 million to 175 million to 350 million in 5 years. And then we went in 2011, I think we hit, late 2010, I think we hit $1 billion in sales. And in 2013, we hit $2 billion in sales. We actually grew by $1 billion in sales in 24 months.
Why locate in Flint of all the places in the United States or the world?
Well, we started here, and my headquarters at Diplomat were here, and so it made the philosophical difference there. But also, at that time, we had to hire a lot of people in Michigan, and Flint, Michigan in particular, had one of the highest unemployment rates. I remember at that time that we were looking to hire these people in late 2009 and 2010. The country's unemployment rate had climbed to close to 14%. And I think Las Vegas and Flint were the highest cities at close to 25%. So I needed to hire a lot of people. I had a lot of people, good, hardworking Midwesterners that really were willing to do, a great task and a good job. And so we hired people for call centers, we hired people in the medical space, we hired people to be patient care coordinators. We trained people who had not worked in healthcare to be healthcare workers. And it was part of what was really powerful to me is this community embraced us and people stepped up. We were in amazing hyper growth, but we were able to hire people to keep us ahead of the curve.
Now, the management of that operation must have been pretty complicated from a little pharmacy on Beecher Road. How did you make that transition?
You're right, Art. It was a wild, crazy time. I always learned a long time ago that there were a lot of people smarter than me. I just needed to surround myself with them. And so as we started to grow really rapidly, we were growing so quickly, I had the luxury of being able to hire really good people. And we actually hired a lot of people at a leadership level from around the country. The head of Hewlett Packard, sales who'd gone to work for Walmart and was running Walmart, 1-800-contacts and Walmart.com, came on board to manage a portion for me. Guy moved from California that was running a $100 million specialty pharmacy out there and moved to Fenton and Flint to be my head of operations. So we brought leadership that understood the industry from around the nation. And then we filled in with people with skill sets, from the local community, because in the local community of Flint and Genesee County, even in Michigan, we didn't have the leadership skill sets, but we had the great working mentality and we had the great workers. So we stayed ahead of the curve, Art.
Eventually you sold Diplomat Pharmacy. So that's
right. Well, we took it public first. We went public in 2014, did an IPO. That was an exciting time. And I had never really wished to be a public CEO, but it was a very exciting time. And it's kind of powerful, as a CEO, you get to stand in front of investors and talk about, the company you love. And so that was a pretty fun time for me. But I retired in 2018 and the company was up for sale. And in early 2020, that sale consummated. They sold the company to United, really a top 5 Fortune 500 company. I think they were the largest healthcare company in the United States and a Fortune 5 or 10 company altogether.
This company hasn't moved out of Flint yet, right?
No, they haven't. Of course, COVID has created a situation where, that facility has mostly been working remotely. Knock on wood, I hope they keep a strong presence here. I don't really, since they bought in, I'm not on the board, I'm not involved. But you're correct. The Diplomat entity is still operating in its same location out of the Great Lakes Tech Center. But again, mostly remotely, and as we wait for COVID to finish. We definitely at Diplomat grew and expanded from a traditional drugstore filling prescriptions. We added the whole patient care side of it, where we started. I mean, at one point, I think we had almost 100 nurses that were employed by the company. We started adding home infusion services, and that became a service. We actually acquired about 20 locations across the nation. And at the end of my reign, I think Diplomat had 26 locations in 21 states. And so we acquired in the specialty infusion space, and we acquired in the patient care and patient services space. And the company that bought us, United, has a division called Optum, and that's exactly what they've done. They've created, a multifaceted healthcare company with lots of levers.
Now you went off and weren't content to just go to the beach. You started another company. I see.
Well, I actually started another company ahead of time. I always loved the entrepreneurship side of things. And while it was exhilarating and exciting to run Diplomat as a large company, I did always like that early stage entrepreneurship. And so in 2014, I had created SkyPoint Ventures, which was a small venture capital and real estate development firm. And we did a couple of projects. I bought the Dryden Building, which was the original offices of General Motors, built in 1901 by William Patterson, from the Patterson Coach Company. And I bought the building next door, which was the Ferris wheel, the old Ferris Furs building. That building had been dark for 36 years. And so throughout my last few years at Diplomat, we were renovating and creating some work in Flint as kind of a sidebar with my company, SkyPoint Ventures. So what happened when I retired from Diplomat, I kind of put my stuff in a box, got in my car, drove 3 miles down the road, and my new office was there. I really never stopped. And I always say I kind of tried to retire, but I really didn't. I just moved. I moved locations.
This new company, that Forum Health Enterprises, is that a telemedicine?
Yeah, we're incredibly excited about Forum Health. We're making a lot of progress. It is a telemedicine company, but it's based on brick and mortar as well. It's interesting because telehealth, telemedicine, really the term they're using now a lot, is telehealth, has probably been moved forward 10 years in the last 18 months because of COVID. COVID has really created the need for people to be able to see their healthcare providers in a safe and a home environment, just like it has with Zoom, just like you and I right now, right? I mean,
right.
You might have done a little bit of this before, but now it's everybody's life where we're talking remotely. But we are a brick and mortar location. We have 12 clinics across the United States. We're in the process of buying another 15 or 20 this year. Our goal by the end of 5 years is to have 150 brick and mortar locations across the United States. But we do a lot of unique types of medicine. And so all of our doctors already do telehealth. Like we've got a specialist on Lyme disease and things, Salt Lake City, and he has CC patients across the United States. And, several of our doctors have patients from foreign countries that come in.
Phil, you've done a lot downtown. It's been reported, and I don't know if it's true, that you've put perhaps as much as $50 million in downtown developments, either by way of philanthropy or for direct investment, renovation of the Capitol Theater and other charitable donations, such as gifts to the University of Michigan. You must feel good about Flint to do that. You must feel that your money's well spent.
Art, it's a great question. And the absolute answer to that is I really do. And again, I always had a nice affinity for Flint. I mean, I grew up as a kid in Fenton, Michigan, and I remember seeing The Sound of Music at the Capitol Theater, right? I remember taking a date downtown Flint and seeing Gone with the Wind, and the beautiful downtown back in the days. My mother used to take me to Smith Bridgman's, and so I had a lot of great historic feelings for the company. And then Flint Township was a great place to build, but it's really just this last 10 years since we bought the tech center that we got deeply involved in the community. And I really understood maybe the hard work and the grit and the strength of the people in the community. And so it was easy to give back. And we had the Hagerman Foundation that gave a lot of money to a number of causes. And then we got involved and excited about buying buildings. Again, I bought 3 buildings downtown and I renovated 2 of them. And we donated the 3rd one to the Greater Flint Health Coalition, which has gone live now with a dramatically expanded, health network in the building that we were able to donate to them. So I do feel good about it, but I also feel like we've been able to make a difference. One thing about Flint, it's got lots and lots of problems, but the problems in Flint are kind of similar to the size of the city, right? They're somewhat bite size. Flint isn't Detroit. It doesn't have the size of the problems Detroit has. Our problems are big and our problems are challenging. But if you have a concentrated group of people like Flint has always had, uptown development and a great chamber and a number of other people that led the way long before me, I felt like we could make a difference with our money and our resources, and I think we have.
I agree with you 100% on that, and been involved in some of that. So there's a lot of people who have done a lot of things that form the basis of a city. And I understand that it's not always easy in Flint, having been raised here. I wanted to ask you about Flint itself and maybe finish up our interview with that. What I've learned over the past year in talking to so many people about the city and looking to see, as you have, how it can be improved. What it seems to come back to is this identity of Flint. You've referenced it a little bit, talking about the city's character, if you will. Does Flint have a cultural identity that has emerged from in this century? I mean, it seems to me, in talking to people, that there has become a shared identity around this concept of people being Flintstones. I never heard that word except on cartoons before, until about the turn of the century here, about 2000.
Yep, I actually think it's great, and I think part of that, Flintstones kind of came. We had, sports, expertise coming out of the city and things, but I think the answer to your question is Flint has, kind of reemerged with a personality and a persona that I'm certainly proud of. When you really think about it, and some people have articulated this. I'm not the first person to articulate it. But a lot of people believe that the middle class of the United States was born in Flint, Michigan, and cities just like it. General Motors and things suddenly gave people, serious jobs that they could work hard and make a lot of money at and take care of their families and create generational opportunities where you had, a father would work at General Motors and his son would work at General Motors and the son's son would work at General Motors. And there was a culture over, 50 years, as General Motors started to really build its presence in Flint in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and that remained strong until, the 80s or so. It was a thriving community, and it was a tough, hardworking community, and probably kind of a richer feeling community than it was, because even though a lot of the jobs were more blue collar, you might have a husband and a wife or family members all working, extra overtime and things, and the cost of living was fairly low, and the overall household income in Genesee County, Michigan was one of the higher ones in the United States because of the success of General Motors. But, as everything got beat up badly, Flint people didn't go away. They really showed their grit. And I do believe that over the last 10 years, both through maybe the last 20 years, through the decline of the automotive industry and then through the water crisis, this community has shown itself to be tough and resilient. And while you can kick them down, they won't stay down. They'll keep popping up and pushing forward. And I think that we're seeing that now. We have a thriving downtown. Even as we came out of the water crisis, we got hit with COVID, right? And yet downtown is still thriving. There's still waiting lists for people to move into apartments downtown.
Some people identify themselves as Flintstones. I'm sure you've come across that in your work in Flint. I'm not sure exactly what a Flintstone is, but I think you just described it. I've talked to 100 people, 99 out of the 100 said Flint was a resilient place. The question I want to ask you is this. In other cities around the country, particularly if you look to Cleveland and Akron and Youngstown and that area, they've had many of the same problems, and they have experienced a bit of a renaissance. Especially Pittsburgh. There's some experts who say that when you see what you've been involved in, which is very dynamic, very fast-paced, it's changed that. So my question is the collective memory of Flint a problem for somebody like you who wants to take Flint in a new direction?
Well, you said a couple things. I want to circle back a little bit to the Flintstone thing and then talk about the reinvention. When you ask what a Flintstone is, there's a great T-shirt you can buy in Flint, and I actually sell them in our shop downstairs. And it says Flint, and then it describes it. And Flint is one of the hardest stones, of all kind, right? It's one of the hardest, most resilient stones. Think about Flint with a lighter and stuff. It can generate sparks and it can create fire. And so that's part of this whole name of Flintstone. It's the strength of the flint as a type of stone, the strength and the resilience and the sparks of that stone. In terms of the reinvention and things, I think there are some challenges. We have to, if we're going to be a collective group of people, we have to recognize the good and the bad things that have happened, but I don't think we always have to embrace the bad things over time, right? I don't ever want to say anything about the water crisis to diminish the challenges it created for the people that were involved in it. But I think we have to recognize that a lot of challenges and things were done, and the city has worked hard to move beyond that. And almost all the pipes are replaced now, and we're probably over the next 2 to 3 years, we'll have some of the best water integrity of any older city in the United States. So Flint was considered the canary in the coal mine in terms of water risk and things, but now we're going to be considered, a path of other cities to be able to move forward. So I don't think we forget the bad things that happened, Art, but I think in the process of reinvention, we have to grab on what our strength was in the past, which was the strength of our people and our hardworking Midwest mentality. And we have to look at the resilience as part of the reinvention. And so I believe that we don't have to leave our past behind. I'm not a believer that in order to reinvent Flint, we have to become something new and different. I think we have to embrace the hardworking, the makerspace ethic that we have. We made things, right? We did things with our hands, and we did a lot of that. We have to diversify this city. We can't just be an automotive company, and we're not now. We're becoming a healthcare community. We're becoming a technology community. We're becoming a more diverse community. But that work ethic still carries on. So I just think the reinvention needs to embrace what was great about your community and not hide the fact that we had our challenges.
Has, as part of its cultural identity as a city, become well known through decades, maybe more than 100 years at this point almost. Labor rights, human rights. The city even celebrates a strike. Over the years, like you, I've been involved in economic development activities as a chairman of the county board's economic development committee for 6 years. I served on the planning commission for the county. Some of the marketing people that we've come across over those years, of my 2 decades in government, some of these professionals wanted Flint to forget about its long history of activism and civil rights and fighting for things such as housing equality. When you look at the Flint water crisis and you look at the legacy of activism in the city of Flint and in the area itself, it's that activism that actually has brought the water crisis to the fore. I mean, we probably wouldn't be talking about a water crisis if it hadn't have been for the unwillingness to take no to the answer. My water smells, bad, and it tastes like turpentine, and it's people actually told them go get lost. That's not the spirit of Flint. They don't just go get lost. I mean, that was kind of dumb on their part. But when you look at what I'm trying to say here, Phil, is you're not constrained by any of this. Is there room in your vision for Flint to incorporate those kinds of things that give enough room in the long term, or I guess not just you specifically, but the city itself and how people are trying to change it? Is there enough room to incorporate those kinds of things so that we don't lose the energy as a collective? We don't lose the Flintstones.
Yeah, I absolutely think there is. And in fact, instead of being constrained, I really think there's an opportunity to be able to feel empowered by it. Again, if you've got good, hardworking people who want to take care of their families, again, this whole idea of the birthplace of the middle class, it was a great place for parents to raise children, with good schools and with good jobs and with a level of affluency that the middle class kind of subscribe to. And I don't think you ever need to lose any of that. And because we had our own challenges and problems, to me, that's empowering. The idea of coming back from a challenge, if everything's always easy and good all the time, it's hard to grow, right? But when you have significant challenges, those are the opportunities and the times for people to really separate and step up and grow, whether they're activists, whether they're industrialists, regardless of who they are. And I think that's where Flint's at right now. So I feel empowered by the past history and, supported by others in the community. And, anything I've ever wanted to do in this community to try and make it better, I have never lacked people standing next to me and say, where's my role? Right. I don't have to lead this charge. I just have to be part of the front line. And there's a strong front line here that's been driving this. Many of them long before me, most of them still here, guys like Phil Schultz and, Tim Herman, in Ridgeway and the Mott Foundation, many, many more people that have been in this community for a long time, building things and creating opportunity.
There's a couple things that worry me about Flint today. I don't know if they're what worry you, but I'll share it with you. One of the things I'm worried about is there's been a significant change in the region. In other words, Flint's adopted this Flintstone thing is not just a City of Flint thing. It's a regional identity that's emerged. It's a point of pride. You know, those basketball players were champions. People have taken that to their own cause. They've taken the toughness, the resilience. They've taken this onto their own. And I talked to an expert the other day in Germany, a professor who studies these kinds of things, and he says, you know, it has its birth in sort of a populism that's emerged throughout the world. I mean, not just in industrial places like Nuremberg, Germany, where he did a study, but also in Flint. And when he talked to some of the political people, they've seen really significant shifts in the way people view not just politics, but development and so forth. So the Flintstone thing may have some limitations, and it could get to a point where if the Flintstones get frustrated, that might be, you know, it's a point of great strength, and it also could be a point of problems as maybe their picture of the city and how to redesign the urban space gets done, and they feel alienated by that. There's really two approaches. One is raise hell about it or move away and give up. Given that's one worry I have, and from a public safety point of view, that worried me a lot for quite a few years. I'm interested in what you worry about, because I'm sure your worries are a lot different focus than mine. That is about the city itself. And when I say the city, I mean the whole place. I mean, just the region itself.
Again, we are doing business. Forum Health is, creating business, nationally. And yet we moved the headquarters of Forum Health in the last year. The headquarters of Forum Health were split between Chicago and Salt Lake City, and we moved it up here. We moved our call center to the fifth floor of the Dryden Building, where now I've got a dozen employees, on the phones answering calls from all across the country. And again, part of that is because we believe in the work ethic and we believe in the workforce in this community. But I mean, from my point of view, it's really a case of, and I love the, kind of that cultural feel of the Flintstones, but it's really more than that. I don't think that's just what it is. I think it's just really about a resilient community that was, people that were hard worked and proud and tool and die and maker space and trying to, get kind of reinvent themselves and reinvent the city in a number of different ways. I don't think it's single faceted art. I think it's multifaceted. And we've been really blessed to have such strong organizations like the Charles Stewart Mott and the Ruth Mott Foundation. And what we've tried to do here, Art, with downtown is, as downtown kind of led the redevelopment, that did create some fractioning because, you've got the north end of Flint and the east side of Flint that were still having some of their struggles, and crime was higher in those areas. They reached the point where downtown crime was really low, and in the periphery, like a lot of communities, crime and great gang activity is really high. I don't think anybody in this community, particularly the philanthropic group around here, gave up on the periphery of Flint. And so it's two things. I think we've done a good job in the last 5 years strengthening the North End, Bernstein Fieldhouse, other programs like that, through support from Mott, through support from even the Hagerman Foundation. But then the other thing, Art, that I think was really important to Flint to help strengthen its identity was to win the suburbs back, right? When I was young, everybody came to Flint, it was the city. But then after a period of time, if you lived by Linden and Fenton and everything, you went down to Ann Arbor or Brighton. And if you lived up north, you went to, some of the cities up north, Bridgeport or, where the malls were up there. And so what we've done in Flint, I think, by bringing the Capitol Theater back, by having one of the top farmers markets in the country back, by having U of M Flint thriving so much in the last few years, is we've also worked to bring the suburbs back. Right. And, when the Capitol Theater was running before COVID, I heard dozens of times people said, oh, my gosh, that was an incredible concert. I haven't been, JJ Gray is here. Right. I haven't been downtown Flint in 20 years. I went to dinner. I went to a concert. I can't believe how great Flint was. So it's really a case of using all of the capabilities Flint has to go beyond just a single personality of Flintstones and really emerge as a cultural city in a small Midwestern city that people love to enjoy.
Right. Now that brings me to the next notion, because Flint is more than its downtown, and you well know that. its infrastructure is underutilized, inefficient, and expensive to maintain. So it's sort of like owning a 20,000 square foot house when you only have you and your wife. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So at some point that the city has to shrink. I mean, I know that's a naughty word in some parts of town or other parts of this country, but the reality is we've got about 600 miles of water lines and other storm sewer lines and so forth. And the best guess of some of the experts say is a city at its current population or even less would only need about 300 miles of those lines. Some people claim the cost of repairing that's $300 million. Do you have any opinions about Flint's efforts to right size itself?
Yeah, I do. I don't, it's not an easy answer and it's not a one-time solution, right? It's a process that takes place over time. And I think, a couple things that are happening. The most important thing is to stabilize the city so it's not continuing to lose population. I think stabilization has happened and we're losing a lot less people than we did before. I think the next thing is how do you bring people back into the downtowns? There's a lot of interest. There was a tremendous amount of interest into moving downtowns. COVID has changed that a little bit. People kind of fled from downtowns because of the traffic. I think that's going to reverse itself fairly quickly. So Art, I really think it is, those are elephant-sized problems and the way you fix them is one bite at a time, right? We aren't going to fix the, 600 miles right away, but I think what you've got to do is you've got to put your time and effort and money where it makes the most amount of difference. And I think in Flint, they've done that by stabilizing communities like the North End with strong programs like Bernston, with stabilizing the downtown traffic and bringing it as a draw with things like the farmers market and the Capitol. And then one by one, downtown, for example, less than a year ago, 6 months ago, we opened a brand new hotel that's thriving. And so I think that it's a case of, not being afraid of the problems, not burying your head in the ground, but also not recognizing that we can't fix them all overnight, right? And just take them on as we can.
Right.
And even the challenges of COVID have actually created some financial opportunities for cities like ours to be able to, take advantage of it. The water crisis, as damaging as it was, created a lot of inflow of capital into Flint that allowed us to do some of that infrastructure change. COVID is going to create some infrastructure opportunities for cities as well as some of the new money comes to cities to help them be, reinvigorated. We just have to be smart with what we do, and we have to learn from past mistakes, Art, and try and make a difference in the future.
Can Flint ultimately be saved as a viable, efficient, working place? I mean, I understand what you've done downtown. I'm not in any way diminishing that. I'm asking a more serious question, which is Flint has to be a viable entity in a lot of spheres. And those spheres have to be to deliver public utilities and to do it safely, to have public roads that are maintained and have some ability, and to have a government that actually functions. My opinion at this point is the government's dysfunctional at a lot of levels. Is it possible to fix these problems, in your opinion? I mean, you're an optimistic guy.
Right.
I'd like to hear your opinion about it.
Well, I'm gonna coach my opinion to start with, Art, and tell you that I'm an eternal, optimist, right? I always say the glass is half full, and I usually think it's champagne. And so, those are big challenges. But first of all, I think from a philosophical national level, we have to have our cities like Flint, Michigan, strengthened. And to your point, cities like Flint and other cities like us. I was in Youngstown recently at a technology incubator where we were doing a pitch contest. I was one of the judges in a pitch contest a year ago, just before COVID. Pittsburgh is a good example. Cleveland is an incredible example. Even Grand Rapids, when you look at how thriving Grand Rapids is today, in the 80s and early 90s, Grand Rapids had its own challenges as well. But that downtown just turned around and thrived, and it was so far ahead of us. Look at Detroit and what Dan Gilbert and his group did. Detroit is probably 5 to 8 years ahead of where we're at. And so, again, none of those cities turned around overnight. Most of them took the resilience of the people, one bite, one step at a time. So I think cities like Flint, we have to get enough support from the federal government, but we have to be smart internally too. I think our mayor is doing a great job, and it's not easy. I think our dysfunctional government is less dysfunctional now than it used to be. I think that there's better alignment in the community than there's been before. Is it all good yet, Art? Probably not. And probably some people may think we're less aligned now than we used to be. But I see less of the fight between downtown and the suburbs. And I see more people, maybe we don't have all the answers, but more people kind of working together to try and find them than we have had in the past. And so I see an optimistic path that requires a hell of a lot of work still.
Phil Hagerman, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you, and I really like your optimism, to be honest with you, because thanks for joining me.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the chance to talk a little bit about a city I love. Appreciate it.
Okay.